Hello, today is Wednesday, November 18th, 2015, and I am your host, Sue Brown, and welcome to info2rail, your freight train to modern media. How y'all doing today? I want to welcome you all to our show. It is an absolutely beautiful Wednesday morning here in Canandaigua, New York. Looking a little bit cloudy out there, and it's very windy, but it's not all that cold outside, and there's no white stuff on the ground, so far, so good. I want to welcome you all to our show. We have a great show in store for you today. We are very fortunate to have Psychic Bystander Louisa Oakley Green with us today. First, we're going to take a little glimpse into the missing person files. We have a missing mom, Stephanie Ann Harper Pluskhat, Pluskhat, age 25, of Castleton, North Dakota. Has not been heard from since October 10th, 2015. At this time, foul play is not suspected. Stephanie was last seen wearing black pants, a black shirt, and white athletic shoes. Stephanie is 5'6", 130 pounds, has strawberry blonde hair and blue eyes. If you have any information regarding Stephanie's whereabouts, please contact Cass City Sheriff's Office, Fargo, North Dakota. Detective Steve Gabrielson, Gabrielson, at 701-241-5842, or call your local 911. The next one is a missing diabetic. His name is Marcus Fields, age 47, from Point Pleasant, West Virginia, was last heard from on November 2nd, 2015. Fields talked to a coworker on the phone and said he was on his way to Huntington, West Virginia to pick up some items for work, but he did not return to work as expected. Fields is 6'2", 260 pounds, bald, and has a goatee. Fields has severe diabetes and may prevent him from being able to contact family or coworkers. He drives a maroon Chevy 2000 Monte Carlo. Vehicle representation shown is not the actual vehicle, so the picture that's in the flyer that's on our website is not the actual vehicle. But the Ohio license plate is GPY 4109. G is in Gary, P is in Paul, Y is in yellow, 4109. Anyone with any information on his location, please contact the Point Pleasant Police Department at 304-675-1104. As I tell you guys each and every week, and I will continue to tell you in every interview I do, it's so important to me. It's so important to me that we're all on the lookout for our missing people. I don't need to remind you each and every time how important that is, because one day that could be your loved one. God forbid, I hope that never happens. But you know what? We take care of each other and we look out for each other, and that's the way it really should be. All right, we're going to go to a short break, and when we return, we're going to have Louisa Oakley Green with us. Stay tuned. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Okay, we are back with Louisa Oakley Green. Louisa didn't believe in psychic phenomena when she met her husband, Stephen, but more than 20 years later, her views have changed. Her 2 books in the Psychic Bystander series reflect her journey from skeptic to believer through hundreds of paranormal stories involving her family and everyday people across the United States and around the world. A scribe for several decades, her passion for the written word is evident in her career that has included working as a newspaper reporter, humor columnist, health magazine editor, public relations manager, advertising copywriter, medical writer, and finally exclusive creative director of a digital advertising agency. These days, she earns her living as a freelance writer. Hello, Louisa, and thank you for being on info2rail.
Hi, nice to be here.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about you and how you got started and what you do?
Sure. I kind of think of myself as a psychic bystander, which is the subtitle of both of my books, because I have absolutely no psychic ability whatsoever, but I am surrounded by people who are psychic. And before I met my husband more than 20 years ago, I actually was quite a hardline skeptic about anything paranormal. I just thought it was superstition. But I met this wonderful man, and it turned out that he was extremely psychic, as was his family. And I find, even though I'm a science writer, that over the years I have seen such remarkable things that I really have to be open-minded and admit that there's something there that we can't explain.
I think I was a skeptic as well, until these crazy things started happening to me. When I was reading about you, I just wondered, I'm like, what is a psychic bystander? I've never heard the term used before, so it captivated me as soon as I saw it, and I said, that is something I definitely want to learn about.
It's funny. I like to tell the story of how I met my husband because I think it gives a really good picture of how someone who is not psychic, such as myself, or let's just say not in tune with my psychic, and someone who is very psychic, which would be my husband, can view the same evening in an entirely different way. And before I tell the story, there's something I need to explain that will help people understand what happened in the story. Now, scientists have found that every human being has an electromagnetic field around them. And that electromagnetic field vibrates at a specific rate. And it's so individual for each person that it's almost like an energetic fingerprint. Now, some psychics can feel that vibrational energy, and my husband tends to be one of them. So the story is going to have that in it, and having that understanding helps to understand the story. Now, I was a freelance writer, and I was assigned to write a story about a local psychic. And so, I'm rolling my eyes, but I'm a professional. I go to, whatever assignment I'm given. So I interviewed this woman. She turned out to be very intelligent and articulate, and that kind of surprised me. And at the end of the interview, I looked at her and I said, well, if you're psychic, then tell me who I'm going to marry. And she kind of looked at me and she smiled and she said, well, we have psychic development classes one night every week. Why don't you come? You have an open invitation whenever you're ready. And I went, oh, okay, well, that's cool. And I handed in my story, and I abruptly forgot the invitation for about a year. Then, for some reason, her invitation bubbled up in my mind, and I decided, you know what, I don't have anything else to do. I think I'll just kind of go to the psychic development class and see what it's all about. So I knock on her door, and she answers, and to my great surprise, she remembers who I am. We had only met once. She escorts me in, and she starts introducing me to all her regulars. And, she's saying, oh, this is so-and-so, and I'm shaking their hand, and that's going on and on and on, and I'm forgetting the names as she's telling them to me, but I'm shaking everyone's hand anyway. And when we were finished, I sat down for the class, and it turned out to be quite fascinating, and I decided, you know what, this is fun. I think I'm going to come back next week. And that's basically all I got out of that evening. Now, one of the hands I shook belonged to my future husband, Stephen. And after the class, he raced home and he announced to his parents, and mind you, I didn't even have a conversation with him that night. He said, I've met the woman I'm going to marry.
Wow.
Now, how did he know this? Well, I'll tell you how he knew this. When he shook my hand, when he shakes anyone's hand, there's usually a surge of, like a spike, an energy spike, while his vibrational rate adjusts to the vibrational rate of the person whose hand he's shaken. When he shook my hand, there was no spike. We were vibrating at the same rate. And in his mind, that meant we were soulmates and that we would someday marry.
Wow. That is awesome.
And I guess he was right, because about a year later we did, and we've been married for more than 20 years.
That is so amazing that someone has that kind of a gift.
He's pretty amazing, and I have to say, quite honestly, I didn't take it seriously initially. I just figured, oh, that's kind of a charming little quirk. He thinks he's psychic, Oh, his family came over from Italy. They all think they're psychic. And, I just figured, oh, it's the old world charm type thing. And then things started happening, and I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? I remember the first thing that happened that really made me stop and say, oh, wait a minute, maybe there's something to this. Maybe his entire family isn't delusional, was at my father's funeral. And, I was helping my mother with the funeral, and you know how you just don't make good decisions when you're grieving. You just do
Oh,
stupid
yes.
things.
Yep.
And I called the minister who had been at our church when I was growing up, not realizing that he had been a minister 20 years before. He'd been retired a long time. And I called, and his wife was thrilled that somebody remembered him. And she said, oh, I'll send him on down, you know. So that was nice. And I'm, you know, at the wake, and the minister says, I'd like everyone to sit down. I want to say a few words. So I sat down between my mother and my husband. And we realized after the first few minutes that this gentleman is talking that he has lost his focus and he's just kind of wandering aimlessly in his conversation. And he was such a nice old gentleman that we all sat there politely to listen because, you know, we wouldn't want to offend the poor man. And after about 15 minutes of this, my husband leans over and says, I see your father standing next to the minister. He is tapping his foot. His arms are crossed, and he looks very impatient. Now, that in itself doesn't impress me because anybody can lean over and whisper something in your ear. What impressed me was something that happened a week later. I hadn't had time to talk to anyone at the funeral because you know how it is. So many people come, and the only thing you really have time to say is thank you for coming. So a week later, my brother-in-law, who also happens to be psychic, called and said, Louisa, I didn't want to say anything at the funeral, but I just wanted you to know that while the minister was talking, I saw your father standing next to him. He was tapping his foot, his arms were crossed, and he looked very impatient. Now, that blew me away because he had not talked to my husband. They both saw this independently, and what they saw was precisely the same thing. And that's when I began to think, maybe I need to give a little bit more respect to this.
Wow. I definitely have found myself in the same position before. You know, I've always believed in psychics because I have my own ability deja vu-wise. But when somebody catches me off guard and kind of gives me a message of, you know, something that's going on right in front of my face, and they should not know what's going on at that moment because I'm not somebody who shares that information on Facebook or anywhere. And, you know, the things that I've been approached about are things that are happening like momentarily right before I talk to these people. So, you know, I was a little bit skeptical in that form of a psychic until that stuff started happening to me. So I know what you mean.
Oh, yeah, I think that until it's actually in your life and it's real, there's no reason to believe in it. And I also think it's okay to be skeptical. I think that's healthy. It's funny, we were talking earlier before the broadcast about knowing things before they happen, and I thought maybe I would tell a story about that. I have, in both of my books, I have more than 100 stories. They're both anthologies of true paranormal stories. And this one is from a young lady who lives in Trenton, New Jersey. She tends to have prophetic dreams. She'll dream about something and then it'll happen. Sometimes they're symbolic, but sometimes they're quite literal. And one night she had a dream and woke up crying hysterically and shaking. And her husband said, you know, what's going on? You know, he basically woke her up she was screaming. And she told him that she had dreamed that they were somewhere having drinks and socializing with a group of people. And suddenly a man entered the room brandishing a gun and began shooting. They all hit the floor. There was a shower of bullets, and amid the confusion, she could not find her husband, and that's why she woke up screaming. Now, you know, like most people, they talk about their dreams, and then they kind of go on with their day. But the next night, Linda and her husband went to a club in Philadelphia. A short time after they were seated, she suddenly turned to him and said, we have to leave. And her husband said, well, let me have one more beer, you know, typical guy. And she said, no, we have to leave now. So they did. And as they were walking out, they saw two men in the parking lot near the club fighting over a woman. One of the men left, and a few minutes later, they heard gunshots ring out in the parking lot and saw people stampeding down the street. And they just ran as fast as they could away from that scene. And they heard about it on the news the next day that, you know, this man had gotten angry and returned and began shooting. She, you know, her takeaway from that was, yeah, you know what? From now on, when I get these dreams, I'm taking them 100% seriously. But I thought that was an interesting story.
It definitely is, because I know exactly how she feels. I have that deja vu when I can see to the end of something. I'm awake when I have these, but I know exactly what she means. When you start living it, it's, we got to change this right now. And, you know, I've always been that way. Look, something bad's coming, and if we don't change this right now, it's going to be a bad outcome. And that's...
that's why I brought that story up, because it really reminded me of the experiences that you had.
It is amazing really how the mind works.
And a lot of people have these experiences. It's kind of interesting. I think when our inner voice tells us something, we need to you can call it intuition, whatever you'd like, but we're usually better off when we listen to that gut feeling.
I think 9/10 of us, though, ignore it, like, oh, we're just being silly, or, you know, there's no truth.
But do you notice bad things often happen when you ignore when you ignore that? You know, I mean, you were telling me that was certainly the case with you.
Oh, definitely. And, you know, I am a firm believer that I think we all have the deja vu moments. For me, you know, a lot of people say, yeah, I had deja vu and I relived it all over again. It was cool. Well, for me, it's a warning sign, and it always has been. I've never had a deja vu that wasn't going to end bad.
Well, then somebody is on the other side is looking after you and feeding you that information.
I think the big part of the psychic stuff that happened in my life was when my grandfather died. They lived 3 houses up, and I woke up in the morning and I looked at my mother and I said, my grandpa's going to die today. I said, I can't go to cosmetology class, you know, and she's like, it was her dad, so she got mad at me. Don't talk like that. I was like, I'm just saying. And I went and laid down on the couch in the living room after they left for work, and all of a sudden I stood up off the couch, looked at my body laying on the couch, and floated. I did not walk because I did not have feet. I floated up the street, 3 houses where they lived, floated through the wall, and I watched my grandpa die.
You had an out-of-body experience. That's amazing. Good for you.
It was, I'd never experienced...
A little unsettling, perhaps.
Well, I never experienced death that close to my family, so, you know, for me, what I experienced put me in a way where I don't remember anything for like a month after that. My whole life just seems like it was over, but when I just lost my dad a year ago in October, I had the peace that I needed to let my dad go in peace and not have it just, you know, be so devastating that I couldn't live with it. And I think that was why I was put in that situation, so that when it came time to lose my parents or the people closest to me, that I would be okay.
Sure. That makes sense. It's kind of funny. I have peculiar funny, not funny. One of the stories in my second book is a story about a gentleman whose father came back from the dead to help him out, which I find very interesting. This was told to me by his sister, who lives in England, and she's a retired school teacher. But back in 1974, when her brother Ronnie was 43 years old, he had a first-hand experience with how nosy departed relatives can be. and believe me, they are. Fortunately for him, a little post-mortem parental interference saved his life. He was having a lot of problems at one point in his life, and he decided he was going to kill himself.
Oh, no.
He purchased, it happens sometimes. He purchased some rope with the intention of taking his life by hanging. And at a point at which he was about to do it, his father's ghost came back, appeared to him and said, and remember, this is England, he said, don't be so bloody stupid. What are you doing? You can't do this. And Ronnie immediately stopped because he was so shocked at what he had seen, and he decided, well, okay, maybe suicide wasn't the answer to his problem. And as a result, he lived a long life and enjoyed many things that he otherwise might have missed. He didn't realize that life was going to get better. He finally passed with natural causes in 2008, and his sister, Linda, misses him, but she assumes that he's probably joined their father in getting involved in other people's earthly business. And she says maybe just sometimes that type of interference isn't such a bad thing after all.
Wow. I'm telling you, before the things started happening to me, I was definitely a skeptic as well. And I love the stories of, I love to hear other people's accounts of what they've experienced when it comes to psychic phenomenon, because it's amazing.
And that's why I started writing these anthologies, because I'm so fascinated. I mean, I'm a science writer. That's what I normally do. And I'm just fascinated by the human experience. And, psychic experiences are part of that. So both of the books have more than 100 stories because I just love gathering people's stories and I like telling them.
You have one about a child named Denise who studied Playmate, was a little girl that she had met in the graveyard.
Oh, yeah.
That reminded me. That just.
Would you like me to tell that story?
I would, but it reminds me so much of how many times our children have playmates that are in fact really there that they can see and talk to.
Oh, yeah.
And how us as parents, though, we shut our kids down and we don't allow our children to believe what they see or believe what they experience. So we shut that part of our children down at such a young age.
Some people do, some people don't. My husband's family, since most of them were psychic, were very open about it. He was never shut down. But I do have two stories about that. One is from my first book, and the other one is from my second book. So this one's from the first book. And yes, Denise is a school teacher, and she's been psychic her entire life. She had an interesting experience in that she lived across the street from a graveyard. And so she would run across the street, and she would play with a kid there, and that kid happened to be departed. She had died in a fire. And one of the things that she used to remember whenever they were playing together, and they played together almost every day, was that her friend used to talk a lot about how much she missed her mother. And when Denise grew up, she decided she would research the story a little bit. Like, was there really a little girl in that graveyard who died in the fire? She began to doubt herself. So she researched it, and what she found was that there was indeed a little girl in the graveyard who died in the fire, and her father, grandmother, and siblings had also died in the fire. There was only one person who survived, and that was her mother. I always thought that was kind of interesting because she missed her mother because her mother was still alive.
That's amazing, though. Like I said, though, it's so amazing how much we experience, but we don't believe it. We don't believe our kids. My daughters...
Well, she's a bit of a believer at this point.
Well, my daughters have past lives. When my daughters were 4 and 5 years old, they would tell me what they did when they were 14, what they did when they were 18, what dog they had, what car they drove, where they went on vacation. I mean, it was vivid memories. And this is a 4 or 5 year old kid who had, 3 out of 4 of my kids were that way, would tell me every detail of their past lives.
Well, actually, that's not as unusual as you may think. I also, in my second book, have a lot of studies that have been done on the paranormal scientific studies. And one from the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia studied 2,400, actually more than 2,400 cases of young children who remembered past lives. And these children are from all around the world. And they found that in 50% of cases, children who remembered past lives supplied details of the past life. In other words, they weren't just kind of remembering little images. They actually could supply details. And in 60% of the cases where they supplied those details, there were enough to positively identify the person from their past life.
Wow.
Which is kind of interesting. And they also found, and remember, this was conducted by a university. It was a scientifically based study. They found in 60% of cases where kids can remember past lives, so that's like, most of them, but not all of them, most of them, life ended violently by tragic accident or intentional wounding. So that trauma carried over into their memories of their next life.
Wow.
And the children they studied, many of them, lived in remote villages that were difficult to reach. They didn't have internet, and they were interviewed with an interpreter. And they gave evidence of memories from a person too far away from where they lived for them to have any knowledge of them at all. So that made it very interesting. And when these kids were taken to the remote villages where they remembered a past life, they could identify places and people. Now, they shouldn't have been able to, but they were able to. And here's some other interesting things about what survived from their past lives. They wanted to dress and play, not everyone, but many of them, wanted to dress and play like someone of the opposite past life gender. Now, this puts an interesting twist on people who like to cross-dress. they may be doing that because they strongly identify with their gender from past life.
I wondered that.
Then, yeah, and they also found that there were a number of Hindu children who kept rejecting the food that their parents prepared because it was not prepared in the past life Muslim manner that they were accustomed to.
Wow.
So we also reincarnate into other religions. Many of them harbored fears related to their previous deaths. So, for instance, if they drowned, they had a fear of water, and no one could figure out where that fear came from in this life. And some of them possessed skills that they were never taught, such as playing a musical instrument. If you remember, Mozart could play from the age of 4 or 5 as an accomplished musician. So I can't help but wonder if he had had a past life as a musician. You know, he just kind of carried it over.
That's awesome.
Some of them, and you probably read about this, some of them could converse in another language that they had never been taught because that was the language they spoke in their past life. Interestingly, most of these memories tend to fade as the children get older. But if you get them while they're young, you can definitely get some very interesting information from them.
In your book, Sightseeing in the Undiscovered Country, the one that, the story in there that caught my attention the most, I think, was Katrina, who saw eyeless people.
Yeah, that's interesting because after I interviewed her, because she was saying to me, I'm the only person who's ever seen this. So after I interviewed her, I started Googling it. And there was a man in New York State, she's from Florida, who saw exactly the same thing. And so I sent her the article, and she said, oh, my gosh, for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm crazy. I said, no, I mean, I'd never heard of this thing before, and every single detail you gave me, this man has in his story. So I found it very interesting, but I'll be glad to tell you about the eyeless people that she sees.
Oh, I'd be very interested, yes.
Okay, well, she's been visited many times by an entity that has puzzled and sometimes frightened her. And the first time she saw the creature was when she was about 4 years old. Her father was a carnival carny. So what that is someone who works in carnivals, traveling carnivals, and they used to go up and down the East Coast to follow the carnival, and that was his work. And she traveled a lot in the back seat of a car as a child. On one occasion, her father pulled into a gas station, and her parents left the car for a few minutes, leaving her alone. When she looked up through the car window, she saw a white, translucent woman floating above the car. One detail about the woman made Katrina catch her breath. She had no eyes, just skin where they should have been. Katrina stared at the floating apparition for a while, but it didn't move or say anything. That was the first time she saw something of that nature. When her parents came back, she turned to point to the woman, and the specter was gone. And as I said, that would be one of many visits. The next time she saw the woman was in a dream when she was about 10 years old. And in the dream, she was in a house and looked out the window onto a flat field. The woman was standing in the middle of the field and had a message for her. But she was so frightened that she ran into the bedroom and pulled the covers over her head. She continued to see the apparition even as she grew out of childhood and into her high school years. She said in the interview, I'd be coming out from work and walking to my car, and I'd see her standing next to my car or sitting inside. But by the time I got there, she'd be gone. She also saw the eyeless creature standing on a street corner one day. Her most recent brush with the entity was 3 years ago when she was 22. This was the only time she would be close enough to where she could, if she wanted to, reach out and touch the eyeless woman. It was the night before leaving her relatives in Michigan to move back to Florida, and it was 3:02 a.m., and as most people who do paranormal know, 3 a.m. seems to be that magic time. She woke up because she felt weight on the corner of her air mattress, and the woman was just sitting there, the eyeless woman, and, Katrina knew it was her. She ignored her, though, because she was frightened, hoping she'd go away. She wasn't negative or threatening, but seeing someone who's eyeless was a little bit unsettling for Katrina, and I think, frankly, I would freak out. About 2 minutes later, she got up and left the room, the eyeless woman. And Katrina married shortly after that and hasn't been visited by the eyeless woman since. But since she studied the paranormal more, she actually isn't afraid of her anymore, and she wishes that the woman would come back so that she could understand whatever the message the woman wanted to bring to her. And I just found that was a very interesting story because I'd never heard of eyeless people before, but then I started researching it on Google, and by God, there are other people out there who see eyeless people. And I have no idea what or who they are, but they're out there.
I've never heard of that before, the eyeless people. I think that was just so fascinating, so I was interested in hearing that. I'm definitely...
Yeah, and this is a nursing student. This is like not some crazy, person. This is a scientifically based nursing student who simply is trying to understand. She's extremely psychic. She's trying to understand what's going on around her.
Well, I'm definitely, after this interview, I'm going to get on and order these books of yours, because this is something I absolutely love, to sit down and read stuff like this. It's so amazing. And like I said, I just love to hear other people's accounts of what they've gone through. For me, because I can put myself right in perspective with them, and I love that.
Well, if you'd like, I'll tell you one more imaginary friend story.
Absolutely.
This one's from the first one I told you was from my first book, and this is from my second book. And this story kind of blew me away, because it's one thing to watch a kid talking to somebody invisible and say, "Oh, isn't that cute, imaginary friend?" And what happened here was like well beyond that. This is a story from Christine, who's an export-import coordinator. And she comes from a long line of people who are very psychic. It just happens to run in the family. And this is about her daughter, Marlena, when Marlena was very young. Now, Marlena had a bedroom that was at the top of the basement stairs. So whenever Christine was coming up with a load of wash, she could kind of glance into her room and see how she was doing. She was a really shy little kid, so she used to spend a lot of time playing by herself in her room, and she had a nice little tea set, and across from where she sat there was a miniature rocking chair that somebody had made for her, and it was a cute little girl's room. So one day, Christine was coming upstairs with a load of wash, and she heard Marlena talking to somebody. And as she glanced into her room, she saw the rocking chair rocking by itself. And Marlena handed something that was sitting in the rocking chair, her Barbie doll, and the Barbie doll was suspended in the air.
Wow.
And Christine, froze for a moment and looked, because she couldn't really believe what she was seeing. This rocking chair rocking by itself, this Barbie doll suspended in the air. She walked into the room, and the minute she did, the chair stopped, the doll fell. And she said to Marlena, "Marlena, who are you giving this doll to?" And Marlena replied, "Mommy, don't you see? There's a little girl sitting in the chair."
That is so awesome. I love stuff like that. I absolutely love it. And like I said, so many kids see so many things.
Oh, yeah.
I would see the shadows in my room and stuff when I was a kid, and I was lucky enough to have parents who just told me, "Well, tell them to leave you alone, you're tired." They never told me there's no such thing, stop being ridiculous or anything, Well, so.
And that was the appropriate thing, because usually they will leave you alone if you tell them to leave you alone. They just need to be disciplined like anybody else.
Well, I mean, there's always that, there's a monster under my bed, or there's somebody in my room. And with my kids...
Yeah, I would take that seriously.
Yes. And I tell people that, I have friends, and I'm somebody who everybody comes to for relationship advice, for, psychic advice, for everything. And I hear that so much, I caught my child, talking to somebody who wasn't there. Should I set them up for counseling? And I'm like, no. You know what? You've got to believe that what your child is experiencing, they're really experiencing. I mean, I don't think a child can make up that kind of stuff at that young of an age.
Well, it's kind of interesting. There was a very scientific book written by Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, who's a neuropsychiatrist who taught at Harvard Medical School. And her interest in the paranormal came from, her experiencing it when she was young. And what she found by reviewing all the scientific studies that had been done on the paranormal and on psychic people was that psychic ability tends to be inherited. Our brain and nervous system is like an energy antenna. And in people who are very psychic, they have very sensitive energy antennas, and that can be inherited. It's genetic. And you will find the next thing I'm going to say very encouraging, because she is theorizing that psychic ability represents an evolution of the brain. So people who are psychic are actually more advanced than the rest of us. When I found that out, I read it to my husband, and he was like, "Yeah, see," and I'm like, "Ah, I'm less advanced. That's the way it goes." But I thought that was very interesting. And in fact, it probably about the majority, a very large majority of people who are psychic inherit it. But there's one other way to become psychic, and that's through trauma. And I can give you 3 examples of that. There's a very famous psychic medium, George Anderson, who lives in Long Island. And he, when he was a small child, developed the chicken pox and had a very bad reaction, and his brain swelled, and his parents were told that he might not survive. Well, he did, and he was perfectly healthy after that, except that there was one thing that changed. From that point on, he could see dead people as easily as he could see the living. His brain energy antenna had been adjusted by the trauma. Another person, Joseph McMoneagle, which a lot of people know about because he was a military person who was involved with the U.S. Remote viewing program during the Cold War. And he didn't have any psychic ability until he had a near-death experience. And from that point on, he was so psychic that they put him into the remote viewing program for the military. And the remote viewing program, in case people don't know, is where they spy on people remotely through psychics. And yes, that's the U.S. military. And then the third example is a fellow from the Netherlands, Peter Hurkos. And Peter is a very well-known psychic, in the Netherlands. And he was not psychic until one day he was working on his roof, and he fell off the ladder and hit his head. And from that point on, he was Mr. Psychic. So all of those people, through trauma, had their brain nervous system antenna adjusted, and suddenly were able to pick up on energy that they hadn't seen before.
I often wonder if that's spiritually connected, or does it wake up a different part of our brain that wasn't awake before?
Yeah, I don't know. I think we can only kind of theorize on that. There's so much we don't know about the brain. I mean, even in the science community, they say that all the time. We have no idea. And it's kind of interesting. The University of Virginia, again, I'm going to see if I can find the study because I think you're going to find it fascinating. They found that they had reason to believe that consciousness actually resides outside of the brain. The brain is nothing more than a transmitter, just like a cell phone is a transmitter for whatever messages somebody is giving you from another location. So if you think of the brain as a transmitter, that kind of changes the whole idea of, well, wait a minute, then where are we? And basically what they decided was there were 4 lines of evidence to show that demonstrated basically that consciousness was not in the brain, that the brain was nothing more than a transmitter. The first one was something called deathbed lucidity, and that's been reported in medical journals for 250 years. And what that is in the hours before death, patients who previously had little or no mental functioning because, either they had some sort of terrible neurological damage or psychiatric disorder, tumors, strokes, dementia, schizophrenia, suddenly show a return of mental clarity. In fact, in a study of dementia caregivers in the United Kingdom, 70% of patients with dementia became completely lucid in the hours before death. And the researchers suggested that while a damaged brain may keep a person from thinking, as it dies, consciousness is no longer tethered to expressing itself through the brain, which is a very interesting thing to think about. Now, a second line of evidence they had that consciousness is outside of the body is that they've seen consciousness without a brain. Now, there was a young woman, honor student, who was in an automobile accident, and just for insurance purposes, they did a brain scan. And what they found was that this very highly intelligent woman had very little brain tissue. In fact, all she had was a brain stem. Now, according to modern medicine, someone with only a brain stem should not be able to form any thought at all, but she was. That's kind of interesting. They also cite near-death experiences. People who die and come back, which is basically they're clinically dead and then they're revived. That's the definition of a near-death experience. Have memories of what they experienced while they were dead, which they should not. And their accounts often include vivid perceptions of things they had no way of knowing that either went on around them or miles away. which is very interesting. And then, of course, the fourth line of evidence they had was past life memories, and we've gone into that. Children spontaneously talking about past lives, usually between the age 2 and 5 years old, and the memories generally fade between the ages of 6 and 9.
Yep, that's a truth.
So I thought that was very interesting.
I do. I think that's interesting, too.
That's why the book not only has people's stories, which I find fascinating, but also a lot of scientific studies that have been done, because that's interesting, too.
You are so lucky in doing what you do when you get to sit down and interview these people and talk with them and get their accounts one-on-one. I think that would be so much fun to do. You're very lucky that way.
I love talking to people about their life experiences. I think we learn more from listening to each other than almost anything else. And I'm fascinated by it. And I like the unexplained, whether it be scientifically based or, experience-based. I just find that fascinating. And that's kind of my motivation behind the two books.
Well, I love the same thing as well, and that's why I do what I do. I absolutely love having guests on here and having the opportunity to talk with them about, what got them started in their life, but not only what they do, but who they are, who's behind the book that they wrote, and, who the people are behind what they do. And, for me, it's that personal connection that ties together, who they are with what they do. I think that is just, for me, that is one of the most fascinating things in the world.
I totally agree. I love talking to people about what they've experienced and getting to know them. I enjoyed chatting with you before the radio show. That was kind of nice as well.
Oh, I did as well.
It is nice.
I'm the same way. I think people are fascinating. I'm 44 years old, and I've gotten kind of to the point where, the drama-filled people that, it's always, or he cheated, she cheated, he said, she said. I've turned away from that.
That's nonsense, yeah.
But I've turned away from it so much that I've pretty much, all those friends, those are the ones that are farewell friends if I see them, hi. But, but I have so many other opportunities to sit and listen to people, and it's like, I feel like I'm in their story. I feel like I'm walking, in their shoes, and I can experience what they've experienced, and it's so fascinating.
You learn a lot. You get a sense of perspective. Would you like me to end this with one of the few scary stories I have in my book?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Now, I'd like to preface this by saying that my belief after interviewing people for many years and writing hundreds of paranormal stories is that most psychic activity is loving and compassionate and supportive. We're all surrounded by an entourage of people on the other side who love us very much and want the best for us. But occasionally, there are negative energies out there. They tend to be the ones that the television shows pick on, but I just want people to know that those are more the exception than the rule. But having said that, I'm going to tell you a story about a negative energy. This story comes from England, and this is about a young lady named Lee. And when she was 16, she and her family moved to a rented home in Tunstall, which is in northern England, south of Manchester. And what they didn't realize when they moved there initially was that there was something sinister in their basement. Now, when they were moving all their packages in, the basement became the storage area. And while she was helping her parents put the boxes in the basement, she mentioned to them that she had a bad feeling about that space and she didn't want to go down there anymore. Her parents said, well, you don't have to go there. This is just for storage. One day, however, she ended up being sent down there anyway by her younger brother. They were playing a game of truth or dare, and she lost. And her brother said, I dare you to go down into the basement and no flashlight allowed. Typical little brother. Well, of course, if you have a sibling, you can't back down on these things. So she steeled herself and descended into the basement. Now, despite the lack of lighting, she spied a dark figure sitting on one of the boxes. She did what I would do. She screamed and ran back up the stairs. She said to her brother, hey, there's someone in the basement. I don't want to go down there again. And her brother went, oh, yeah, sure. So he got a flashlight, and he went down into the basement, and he saw nothing, of course. And after that, Lee decided, okay, not going in the basement anymore. That's it. However, one day her parents decided that they wanted to throw a celebration, and they asked her to go downstairs and get a punch bowl that was in a box down there. So she had never told her parents about the apparition, so she figured, no, they're not going to believe me if I tell them. I'll just go down there and get it. So she went down, she found the box, she's got it in her arms, and she looks, and suddenly she sees the figure again, the man. But this time he has a woman in his arms, and she looked dead. He laid her on the floor and started digging a hole. That was it. She, ran upstairs with the punch bowl. For some reason, she still didn't say anything to her parents. I don't know how she accomplished that. I would have told them 10 times over. She decided at the end of the evening to make sure that the door was shut very tight on the basement, and that was it. She was never going down there again. Later that night, she heard a scratching noise in the house that made her jump. She went over to the basement door and found it open. When she looked at the door and walls, there were scratch marks everywhere. And she thought, well, what's causing that? Then her brother saw the scratch marks all over the door and went down and saw someone in the basement. Now he finally believed her. They both tried to talk to their parents about it. And this is England. They said, but they would have none of it. I love that expression. So one afternoon, and by the way, folks, I do not recommend this, and I would not have the guts to do this, but she was 16. She was alone in the house, and she decided to communicate with the entity in the basement with a Ouija board. She said, whoever's in the basement, tell me your name. And it spelled out the name Mark. So she took that name, and she went to the library to read old newspapers to determine if someone named Mark had ever lived in her home. Because remember, this is an old home that they're renting. What she found was that there was a man named Mark Thomas who lived in the house in 1917. He brutally murdered his girlfriend and buried her in the basement.
Wow.
She saw a photo of the girlfriend, and the girlfriend looked eerily like her.
Oh. Wow. That is so awesome.
And I'm happy to say that her parents finally came to their senses and they did move out of that house.
See, for me, I would have stayed there. And that's me. If there was paranormal activity, I wouldn't even have left the basement. I would have been like, what are you doing here? And who are you? And what did you do? And it's just me. I would have got out my spirit box.
When there's negative energy, you generally don't want to be around it. It's just not going to be good for you.
Oh, I know. I just like the chase of the paranormal. So for me, I would have had to ask questions. I couldn't have just left it like that.
Well, yeah, people do that, but it's generally not a good idea to hang out with negative energy. If you can help it.
Definitely not. I mean, I went into a house for a friend of mine because she said it was extremely, uncomfortable in that house, and things would fly across the room and doors would slam. And I mean, this house she lived there, and she moved in with her boyfriend, and her son and his girlfriend and their baby live there now. Well, I went in there for her and I said, I've known you pretty much my whole life. Let's go in here. And when I walked in that house, it was like somebody put a refrigerator on my head, and I was sweating. I felt nauseous. I had a headache, and I just felt this overwhelming amount of hatred and violence and anger. And I said, I can't be here. And
exactly,
I couldn't. And it was, I had to, I went up the steps. I said, I'll follow through. And I got up the steps, and I got to the doorway of this room at the top of the steps. And I said, I cannot go in that doorway. And no matter what I did, there was something that would not allow me to walk through that doorway. And I was like, okay, I have to get out of this house now. And when I got home, I researched it. And the guy that actually lived there way back, he was a suspected murderer of little kids. And before they had the opportunity to prove whether or not he had done it, his wife had murdered him in that house. So, and that's what I felt was the sorrow and the fear from the kids and the anger and the violence from him. And the feeling was the emotion was so overwhelming. And I told her, you better get somebody in there because I'm not going back in that house. Not me.
Yes, that's not a good place to be.
No, but it was very scary, and I wasn't scared, I was overwhelmed, and I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to have a heart attack and die right in that house. And I don't know, her son's girlfriend a lot of times will just pack up her baby and get out of there for the day because the overwhelming negativity and the whatever it is in there picks on her. And I told her, stop giving it any power. The more you fear it, the more it's going to pick on you. And she's like, I just want it gone.
I think she needs to leave. She's not going to win.
Oh, I don't know. See, for me, I don't fear that kind of stuff, and I probably should, but I really don't. And for me, it's, and I had the opportunity to talk with a guy that I had done an interview with, and he was telling me he actually goes in the house and he not only heals the people, but he heals the house and he gets the people out of he stops the haunting from happening. And that's something a lot of people can't do. But he did the research and figured out what causes hauntings, and he's figured out how to stop them, and he's been 100% effective every time.
Yeah, there are people out there who do that, and it's good to find them if you need them. Yeah.
I told him about this, so I wrote her a message, and I'm going to see if it's okay to give her number to him. And I think that, somebody needs to go in there and do something, because whatever's in there is just not going to stop. He's resentless. He's a horrible, horrible entity, and he's very violent. And I told her, you got to tell your son that is not a safe environment for that baby or any of them.
No, I would agree.
But for me, that's a fascinating part of what I do. I want to go to the Virginia Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. They've done a lot of paranormal research and they're paranormal investigating, and they've had a lot of activity. I'm not interested in stirring anybody up or getting anybody upset. For me, it's just to walk through there and experience that for myself. It's the walking through there and actually seeing the phenomena happen in front of me, and the, feeling the emotion of the people that were in there. For me, that's like an amazing rush. I know, I'm strange. Well, I want to thank you.
Well,
you're amazing.
Go right ahead.
You are absolutely amazing. And I want to thank you so much for taking your time to come on here and talk with us. What you do, you are very fortunate to do what you do. And, I'm so thankful that you took the time to share some of this with us. And I would love to have you back on to share more when you have more time.
I would be delighted anytime you want. I guess one thing I'd just like to say, if anyone is interested in learning more about the books, I have a website, www.psychicbystander.com, and you can read about them and see if they're of interest to you.
I was just going to ask you for your website, because I know I'm definitely going to, after I'm done with this interview, I'm definitely going to go on and order them, because, my girls, they love that. And for a lot of times we'll cuddle up at night when it's just me and the girls, and, I'll read to them. Usually it's Harry Potter or something, but I'll read to them for a while, and my 8-year-old is so intrigued by that stuff. So that's something that I can, kind of cuddle up with my 4 girls, and we can read stories together out of that. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, again, I want to thank you. I know that, you have a busy schedule, as a lot of us do, but you took the time out to chat with us, and I'm so thankful.
Well, anytime you want, I'll be glad to come back, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You too, and I would absolutely love it if you came back and we could have more time to chat.
All right.
All right. Thank you. You guys, that was an amazing interview yet again. I so love what I do, and I owe it so much gratitude and thankfulness to all these amazing guests that come on the show and take the time out of their busy schedules to do what they do. And it fascinates me. I mean, Louisa has such an amazing opportunity to sit down and chat with people and get their one-on-one stories with these people, just as I do with the guests I have on. I think in the future here I'm going to do a maybe a call-in where anybody who has psychic stories or ghost stories or whatever can call in. We'll just dedicate a whole like hour or two to you listeners calling in and sharing your stories with the other listeners and with me. I would really love that. So I think I'm going to set a date for that and send out information for whoever of you who's interested in coming. I will definitely get that out to you guys, and we'll set up a date. And whoever, doesn't matter, whatever stories you want to share, whether they're UFO encounters, paranormal stories, psychic stories, anything that's happened to you that you want to share with the rest of us, I think that's great. And I think that is definitely in the works. So I'll have that up there, date and a time on the website, and I'll probably do a small video on it, given the time and the date. So stay tuned for that and look out for that. Well, that's all we have time for today. We post all our shows on YouTube, and if you want to know more about our guests and upcoming shows, please visit our info2rail webpage. Just Google info2rail and click on our Google Sites page. Again, I want to thank you all so much for joining us here at info2rail. I can't tell you how happy it makes me and how fulfilled my life is because of the opportunity that I get to do what I love to do, and I owe that to the amazing guests that take time out of their schedules to be here, and you amazing listeners who take time out of your busy schedules to listen. From the bottom of my heart, God bless you all, and thank you all, and I hope to see you here each and every week. May God bless you and keep you, and may His face shine upon you in these uncertain times. We'll see you soon.